My name is Polly Stewart, and this is my story of forgiveness. Growing up in the country was very, very difficult.